North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. Greetings. My name is John David Wells. This radio show slash podcast slash television broadcast brings you the news, the real news. We analyze the news for fact. After we analyze the news for fact, we draw contrasts between the news and the fact, which is a breach that gets broader every day. We also point out bias. From there, we go to commentary, which is just my opinion. It is not the news. It is not the news. A lot of people who do this job believe that what they say, what they believe is news. They are wrong. In other words, what I say is just my opinion when I come to commentary. And when that commentary is out there, it's up for grabs. In other words, if you think it's fine, great. If you don't think it's fine, great. Share your opinion. Share what you believe with us on this broadcast today. Two ways to do it. You can call us at 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. Operator is standing by. Me. And you can also chat with us. So far, Flem Coughley, just like he did yesterday, won the Wells Report Chat Derby. He was the first through on the chat. Good to have you here. Thanks for joining us. There was an interesting piece of journalism, if you want to call it that came out today that I felt I had to comment on. But first, let me bring you up to date on shootings in America. Police say it took Elijah Dickin just 15 seconds to neutralize a man who opened fire on shoppers at an Indiana mall. Quick action they believe saved countless lives. There's good reason to say that. The shooter was armed with an AR-15. He had 3 magazines. That's 90 shots. He fired 24 times before Elijah Dickin stopped the entire event. Greenwood Police Chief James Eisen said in a statement, quote, "The time lapse between the moment that Jonathan Saperman, the shooter, exited the restroom and began shooting, and when he was shot by the civilian was 15 seconds, not 2 minutes." Greenwood Police Chief James Eisen said in a statement on Tuesday, the surveillance video showed Saperman exit the bathroom at 5:56:48. He was neutralized by Dickin at 5:57:03. I'm going to stop here for just a couple of seconds in the news reporting to say one thing. The word neutralized sanitizes this too much. And I'm going to tell you why it sanitizes it too much. The people who would perpetrate one of these attacks need to understand that their life is going to end very quickly. And they need to understand that their life is going to end very, very quickly because when we cover these stories, there needs to be a straightforward explanation of what happened. If I had been writing this story, I would have said, police say it took Elijah Dickin just 15 seconds to shoot and kill a man who opened fire. Make it simple. Make it easily understood. Make it easily understood so that people who would do something like this realize that there are people out there that will stop them cold, in their tracks, in mid-shot. That's just a personal opinion of mine. Back to the news. The statement corrected a previous police timeline in which authorities said the incident lasted 2 minutes. Police also revealed that a preliminary autopsy report on the gunman showed that he was struck 8 times and died of his wounds, meaning Dickin only missed the shooter twice, despite engaging the threat from a distance. Police say the gunman was armed with 2 rifles, a Glock pistol, and was carrying at least 100 rounds of ammunition. He killed 3 people before quickly being neutralized, again, shot and killed by Dickin, who began closing distance on the shooter as he waved for bystanders to flee behind him. Eisen said Dickin's actions were heroic and very tactically sound, despite him having no police or military background. He trained himself. Many more people would have died last night if it wasn't for the responsible and armed citizen who took action within the first 2 minutes of the shooting. Guy Relford, an attorney hired to represent Dickens, said he was proud of his client's actions at the mall. We all should be. It was a brilliant defense of society from a member of society. Which takes us back to this questionable piece of journalism by John C. Moritz from the Corpus Christi Caller-Times. Uvalde, Texas. That 376 armed and trained law enforcement officers took more than an hour to confront and kill the murderer of 19 children and 2 teachers provided an opening for advocates of gun restrictions to argue against the claim that more guns are the answer to stopping mass shootings. Let me give that to you again. It's a double negative. That 376 armed and trained law enforcement officers took more than an hour to confront and kill the murderer of 19 children and 2 teachers provided an opening for advocates of gun restrictions to argue against the claim that more guns are the answer to stopping mass shootings. However, moments after a committee from the Texas House of Representatives finished publicly explaining the report on Sunday that pointed out the failure after failure by officers at Robb Elementary School on May 24th, an armed and far less trained bystander 1,258 miles away in Greenwood, Indiana, shot and killed a gunman who had killed people at a shopping mall and would probably have killed more. Elijah Dicken, the man who killed the shooter, good use of words there, was called heroic by Greenwood's police chief and mayor. The incident prompted political leaders and Second Amendment defenders to once more invoke the words of National Rifle Association Executive Vice President Wayne LaPierre in the days after the mass shooting that killed 26 at Connecticut's Sandy Hook Elementary School. The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. The competing narratives from 2 incidents 54 days apart will probably do little to bridge the yawning divide that separates the most vocal proponents of gun rights and activists who want more restrictions on who may own firearms and the type of firearms that are commercially available. Some on both sides of the most polarizing issue in politics acknowledge that the good guy argument is too complex and nuanced to be used as a rubber stamp solution to gun violence. Oh, really? I think, frankly, both sides are inclined to use cliches or bumper stickers, said former Texas Land Commissioner Jerry Patterson, who was a Republican state senator in the mid-1990s, was the driving force behind the first law that allowed Texans to publicly carry concealed handguns. There is something called a good guy with a gun, and of course, there are problems associated with it. The problem that we have is that there are a lot of good guys with guns who probably aren't very proficient in their use of a firearm. Oh, really? A well-trained armed teacher inside Robb Elementary might have acted as Dicken did at the Indiana Mall, said Patterson. However, an FBI study in 2021 showed that only 25 incidents since 2014 in which civilians with a license to carry stepped in and shot a shooter. That's 25 fewer mass shooting incidents. The statistic is sobering that would-be victims cannot count on random strangers carrying guns to save them from tragedy, said Nicole Golden, the executive director of Texas Gun Sense, which lobbies for limits on firearm availability. Our leaders at every level of government are responsible for our public safety. And an important element of that is ensuring that dangerous weapons do not end up in the hands of dangerous individuals. Really? Stephen Williford, an NRA member who fired on a shooter who killed 26 people, including a pregnant woman at the First Baptist Church of Sutherland Springs, Texas in 2017, said inaction by law enforcement at Robb Elementary and the swift action by the Indiana man underscores the argument for armed civilians. Uvalde proves that you are your own first responder and that you need to be armed and that you need to be ready because police don't necessarily come to save you. We need to do away with gun-free zones altogether. Completely correct. By the way, the Indiana Mall was a gun-free zone. The guy in Indiana was in a gun-free zone, he said, because he ignored the rules. He was able to stop a mass murderer who was loaded for bear and ready to kill lots of people. This 22-year-old young man was able to take him out. Jacqueline Schildkraut, a criminal justice professor at State University of New York in Oswego, said she's skeptical that most civilians, even if they've taken firearms training, can be counted on to keep cool under such stress. There's a difference between shooting at a paper target that's not moving and completely stationary in front of you and X is in X number of yards away, and then actually firing during a tactical response. Who wrote a study last year, the Schildkraut said that, who wrote a study last year, or this year rather, for Texas Alert, Advanced Law Enforcement Rapid Response Training Center, that examining the advisability of arming teachers. Armed civilians who draw weapons can pose a danger to themselves, she added. If you're a police officer, you walk into a room, you see two people with a gun, you have a split second to make a decision of who's the good guy and who's the bad guy before you drop one of them. How do you know you're going to get that right? You don't. That's why the good guys with guns, have to make absolutely sure that they can prove they're a good guy with a gun. Patterson, who left public office in 2015, said the more likely scenario would be in the Indiana Mall case that an armed civilian limits the opportunity for further bloodshed. A citizen does not have to shoot the threat dead. The mere presence of resistance, maybe even gunfire, immediately changes the dynamic. Number one, the shooter has to pay attention to the person that's shooting them now instead of killing other people. Some political figures who will no doubt continue to use the good guy slogan. University of Political Science professor Brandon Rottinghaus said, but its salience among the mainstream voters may have diminished. It's politically powerful to suggest that arming citizens can be an effective deterrence to mass shootings, but realistically, the notion just doesn't hold up. It's only a political crutch. Call all the people that make sure that you get in touch with all the people who walked out of that mall in Indiana and ask them if that notion holds up. The weird thing about this is, once again, the proof is plain. A good guy with a gun is far better than no good guy with a gun. And this idiot parsing of reality is very disturbing. This is the paper of record for the United States of America, USA Today. They are arguing against plain reality. Why? Why would you do that? Let's point out a couple of things in this article that are true. You cannot depend on a good guy with a gun to be around when you need one. You also cannot depend on a police officer with a gun being around when you need one. What Mr. Patterson says is completely correct. You are your own first responder. You are your own first responder. Are there dangers? You bet there are dangers. But you are your own first responder. These people that say, these people that have never ever been in a situation where people opened up on them, don't understand it. FBI studies have never successfully defended a shooter anywhere. They're just hunks of paper. They just lie there on a desk and do nothing. I don't know. I'll take my chances with a good guy with a gun. Oh, by the way, how do you work out making sure you're known as a good guy by the police? Stick around. We'll tell you next. This is the Wells Report. Stay right there. This is the Wells Report. I am John David Wells. Thanks for joining us today. Telephone number is 817-379-2712. Join us. By the way, there are varying estimates, but Elijah Dickin apparently engaged the shooter in that Indiana mall from any distance from 30 yards to 44. That's a long shot. That is a long shot. The best pistol shot I ever made, ever, was on a chicken target, which is about one of those steel targets, about that big, from 50 yards. I only did it once. But that's one of the most amazing pistol shots you'll ever hear about right there. Congratulations, Elijah Dickin. You saved a bunch of lives. You did. And I'm really very happy about the fact that the guy is not in the news. He's standing back like the guy who would do something like that should. I'm very impressed with Mr. Elijah Dickin. By the way, if you are in a situation, once again, I want to go through this, where you make the decision to draw leather and engage a mass shooter, you're taking your life into your hands on a lot of different ways. First of all, the shooter himself. Second of all, the police who don't know the difference between you and the bad guy. As we discussed, I have it with me right this minute. I carry a shield, a law enforcement type badge. It is not a law enforcement badge, and I never take it out. I never take it out except to show other people, and I took it out once at the Texas State Fair. I think I told you that story. But what I do is that if I am indeed in a situation where I engage somebody, I take that out and I hold it in my hand and I holster my weapon. You also, by the way, need to go and train on that, because something that was said in the article by actually a gun control advocate who said, standing in front of a target punching holes in paper is just not the same as engaging a real target in a real world scenario, and she is completely correct. One, shooting at a target is in two dimensions. It's a two-dimensional exercise. When you're actually shooting at someone who is moving, that's a three-dimensional exercise. And it is a completely different scenario. Completely different. A lot of people will purchase a weapon and never ever practice drawing it out of their holster. There was a shooting at a church down the road from where we live. And one of the guys that got killed because he couldn't clear leather, because he had never practiced. The most important thing that I can say is that carrying a weapon is a societal responsibility, and one you had better be up to before you start doing it. It's just essential. Let's see who's calling. Let's see who wants me to renew my insurance. The Wells Report. Hello. Hello. Hello? Obviously a listener. They realized I was about to make fun of them. By the way, in case you're wondering, Yvonne just asked, he got 8 shots on target at 40 yards. Actually, he got 6 on target at 40 yards. Didn't hit anything in the background. Pretty impressive. By the way, Oregon voters are going to decide on one of the nation's strictest gun control proposals at the polls in November. Oregon Secretary of State Shemia Fagan's Elections Division determined that the Initiative 17, known as the Reduction of Gun Violence Act, garnered enough valid signatures to qualify for the ballot. The proposal had less than a third of the signatures required in May, but high-profile mass shootings in Buffalo, New York, and a grocery store in Uvalde, Texas, elementary school, and the 4th of July parade in Chicago changed those people's minds. It's not going to pass. It is not going to pass. But that it's out there is tremendously scary. It absolutely is. You are listening to the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll continue this broadcast in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. The chat room is available. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on YouTube. Find us on Twitter and Twitch. This just in from the New York Post. President Biden said today that he has cancer. Now, that is either a gaffe or a stunningly casual health announcement during a speech about global warming in Massachusetts. Now, I'm reading this copy. Again, this is from the New York Post. Okay. Biden was describing the health effects of emissions from oil refineries near his childhood home in Claymont, Delaware. And he said this, which sounds like a riff. In other words, he was speaking off the cuff. Quote, "That's why I, and so damn many other people I grew up with, have cancer, and why for the longest time Delaware has had the highest cancer rate in the nation." The president was speaking at near a former coal power plant that's been converted to support offshore wind farms. Biden, 79 years old, is the oldest ever U.S. president, and his mental acuity is frequently a matter of public debate. He says, however, that he intends to seek a second term in 2024, and his defenders note that he's for years struggled with gaffes or inaccurate remarks. That's something that I have said on several occasions. As a matter of fact, when Joe Biden became the nominee for the Democrat Party, I said that he was a gaffe machine. Now, is this a gaffe? Or did the President of the United States just tell us he has cancer? Did he just tell us he has cancer? I don't know. We'll keep our eyes on that story and let you know more as the afternoon continues. I was talking about an Oregon gun restriction law, an infringement on the Second Amendment. The measure would ban large-capacity magazines over 10 rounds except for current owners, law enforcement, and the military, and require a permit to purchase any weapon. To qualify for a permit, an applicant would need to complete an approved firearms safety course, pay a fee, provide personal information, submit to fingerprinting and photographing, and pass a criminal background check. By the way, for those of us who have licenses to carry, actual licenses to carry a concealed weapon, we have done all of that. The state police would create a firearms database. Applicants would apply for the permit from the local police chief, county sheriff, or other designees. The National Rifle Association's Institute for Legislative Action has denounced the initiative, saying on its website that, quote, "These anti-gun citizens are coming after you, the law-abiding firearms owners of Oregon, and your guns," unquote. "I was thrilled to hear the news and thankful for the 1,600 volunteers of all ages," said the Reverend Mark Knutson, a chief petitioner of the initiative, telling the Associated Press yesterday. Knutson said he was heading to the World Track Championships in Eugene, Oregon, when he learned the news by phone. He's the pastor of a Lutheran church in Portland. Knutson said he responded with a prayer for those who have been affected by gun violence in this nation, especially Buffalo, Uvalde, and Highland Park. "I signed it to keep our kids safe because something needs to change," said Ravana Richardson after she signed it last month. "I have a kid that's going to be in first grade this upcoming season. I don't want her to be scared at school." Oregon, home to the most liberal and notorious crime-ridden city of Portland, saw massive anti-police demonstrations and riots targeting federal property after the Minneapolis murder of George Floyd. It appears to be the only state in America with a gun safety initiative underway for the 2022 election, according to the Associated Press. Now, the thing about this is as follows. Like I said, I have a license to carry permit. I have had to do all of these things, but large capacity magazines over 10 rounds, except for the current owners, that is something that unfortunately writes a check that society is going to have to cash one of these days. I'm not going to tell you what the circumstances are, but at some point, someone's going to get into a gunfight, and they're going to need more than 10 rounds. I just hope that horrifying reality is not written in blood. If you want to know more about that, you can join the chat room if you'd like. And I will put it on the chat room if you want to. But I'm not going to announce it here on this broadcast. But one of these days, somebody's going to need more than 10 rounds. It's just the way that works. One of the most horrifying things I ever saw in my life was when I was 10 years old. It was the 1968 Democrat National Convention in Chicago. There was a riot outside the convention venue that was suppressed by an amazing number of Chicago policemen with large riot control sticks. And there was shot after shot after shot, camera shots, of those police officers beating people and hauling them into paddy wagons and hauling them off. It was a bad year. There were two major assassinations, Martin Luther King and Robert F. Kennedy. And it felt like the country was coming apart. When I saw that, I got my first case of horrendous butterflies from something I saw on television. There would be others. But it was the most horrifying thing I ever saw. I got to point out that this was a Democrat-run city, had been a Democrat-run city for decades. It was the old Daley regime. That political machine had been in power, like I said, for decades. But there was a moment when Chicago laid down the law, and that was the so-called, I guess, what would be called now a peaceful protest outside the Democrat National Convention in 1968. It's amazing what you forget. It's amazing what you forget. John Lewis marched for the ridding of this nation of real racism. Not the exploitation of racism, which is what that turned into, but actual racism in the United States. It was in the 60s. He was beaten so badly, he carried a traumatic brain injury for the rest of his life. And when he got to the other end of that, he said, sometimes it's okay to be in good trouble. Good trouble. In other words, running afoul of the police in order to protect or even utilize First Amendment rights, which is what he was doing. However, as we have grown as a nation, what we end up seeing, largely egged on by politicians with a singularly different agenda, is that this so-called good trouble is okay. You know, just let them blow off their steam as they're burning down buildings and lasing police officers in the eyes and all of these other things. Setting fire to federal buildings, setting fire to them. Well, this has transmitted itself into our society to the point where, as being reported by The Guardian US, 1 in 5 adults in the United States, about 50 million people, believe that political violence is justified, at least in some circumstances. A team of medical and public health scientists at the University of California, Davis, enlisted the opinions of almost 9,000 people across the country to explore how far willingness to engage in political violence now goes. They discovered that mistrust and alienation from democratic institutions have reached such a peak that substantial minorities of the American people now endorse violence as a means toward political ends. The end justifies the means. The prospect of large-scale violence in the near future is entirely plausible, said the scientists. A hardcore rump of the U.S. population, once again, this is copy from The Guardian, the survey recorded, amounting to 3%, or by extrapolation, 7 million people believe that political violence is usually or always justified. almost 1 in 4 of the respondents, equivalent to more than 60 million citizens, could conceive of violence being justified, quote, to preserve an American way of life based on Western European traditions, unquote. Most alarmingly, 7.1% said they would be willing to kill a person to advance an important political goal. Let me give that to you one more time. 7.1% said they would be willing to kill a person to advance an important political goal. The UC Davis team points out that extrapolated to U.S. society at large, that is the equivalent of 18 million Americans. The study, Views of American Democracy and Society and Support of Political Violence, was led by Garen Wintemute, Sonia Robinson, and Andrew Crawford. It's been published on the preprint server MedRxiv. Okay, that's MedRxiv. Over 3 weeks, beginning on the 3rd of May, the UC Davis researchers gathered the views of a representative sample of 8,620 people nationwide. That's a big survey, 4 times larger than the typical one, and sometimes even 5 times larger. The scientists set out to discover just how open individuals in America are to engaging in political violence, given the pummeling U.S. democracy has taken in recent years. Extreme political polarization, skepticism about government and democratic institutions, rising gun violence, and increased firearms sales, together with a rampant spread of conspiracy theories and misinformation, have combined into a toxic soup. Its consequences were on display on 6 January when hundreds of Trump supporters and white supremacists stormed the U.S. Capitol building, leading to the deaths of 7 people and scores of injuries. One of those deaths was a woman who was one of the protesters. She got shot in the face by someone who was lauded as a hero later. She wasn't armed. No one in the Capitol building was. No one. I don't know where the deadly force came from that made this officer react with deadly force. And nobody's ever said just exactly what that deadly force was. It just leads me to believe that police officer was willing to go to any means to stop what was happening in front of him. I think that's the most charitable thing I can say. The other people who died in that either committed suicide or died of other causes not having anything to do with the actual incursion. I'm just pointing out bias here. Congressional hearings on January 6th, which are drawing mercifully to a close tomorrow, have highlighted the violence that was unleashed that day and the extent to which the insurrection was coordinated by extremist militia groups. Against that backdrop, the study uncovered disturbing signs of seething discontent and deep unease just beneath the surface of U.S. society. More than 2/3 of the respondents said they feared the country was facing a serious threat to democracy. Remarkably, just over half the sample group, 50.1%, agreed with the contention that in the next few years, the U.S. would confront another civil war, which is reported as a way of saying this particular survey may be a bit shrill in its actual construction. But that being said, let's talk a little bit about this. 20% of Americans believe that political violence is justified, at least in some circumstances. Political violence is never justified. It is never justified. Make no mistake, it is also a fact of life. When people are confronted with things that frighten them, for example, an overarching government telling them how to live, they will react in fear. Sometimes, as in the case of the 60s, there was such rampant racism that the overturning of that racism actually shook the social order of the day. Something that mercifully we have gotten away from. Thankfully, we have gotten away from it. Now what we have is the use of racism as a political wedge, or as a way to essentially stop debate cold. But when you have something like this, you have an awful lot of people that are very, very frightened of their government. This goes with a lot of other surveys that talk about how the number one threat to the number one threat to freedom and liberty in the United States is the United States government. Now, there are a lot of different places for you to take this information. Remember, this is just a survey. There are a lot of people who dramatically believe in the Constitution of the United States and will defend it against enemies foreign and domestic. They were heard from in this survey. There are people who believe that political violence is justified because there's no other way for people to get an unpopular idea into law. You'll have to make those choices. This is the Wells Report. Back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. Thanks very much for joining us. Telephone number is 817-379-2172. Sharon McKeeman lives in San Diego. For a brief moment, I lived in San Diego and went to school there, part of the Grossmont Union High School District. I went to El Capitan High. It was wonderful. Sharon McKeeman is very upset with the mask mandates during the main part of COVID-19. She formed a group called Let Them Breathe. She has slammed the San Diego School Board president. She did that today after she suggested students uncomfortable with the renewed mask mandate, which they are now foisting on all of us again. should just not return to class and may resume virtual learning instead. McKeeman demanded new leadership on Fox News this morning, warning parents that are outraged over her response and the policy reversal. The person, the she's talking about, is the actual president of the San Diego School Board. She said this: parents are outraged. COVID is becoming less severe. The transmission that parents are really worried about are these mask mandates coming back and spreading. I think that outrage was just stoked hearing what San Diego board president said. They are exiling unmasked students to Zoom school, which is a proven failure. Let them breathe. The organization is hard at work helping parents prevent their students' smiles from being stolen again. We are pursuing legal action against San Diego Unified School District, but ultimately what's needed is new leadership. That's why parents like myself are filing to run for school board this week, because we're tired of talking at these school board meetings and not being listened to. There needs to be new leadership so we can end these policies. Two things here. She's correct. Children really don't have a hard time with COVID-19. That's thing number one. Thing number two, she's beginning to realize what we've been talking about for years, that we've got the wrong people leading this nation at virtually every level. The wrong people. We have people that, for whatever reason, believe that they should lord over us as opposed to taking part in responsible governance. And this particular school board president seems to be one of those people. There is no need for a mask mandate in schools. There is no need. If teachers are very concerned that the kids are going to bring diseases with them like COVID-19, they can wear masks if they would like to. Although that would be kind of a difficult thing for a student like me, because even though I hear very, very well, I reinforce what I'm hearing by lip reading. And I've always done that. I've always done it. It's just a way to get another version of the same piece of information. It's served me well over the years. And so somebody in a mask kind of screws me up, because it's hard for me to discern what they're saying, even though I can hear them speaking. So that's probably just a learned behavior on my part, but that's where I am. But these people are afraid that these kids are going to give them dread disease like COVID-19. And that's where all this teachers union gobbledygook is coming from. They're worried that the kids are going to bring them disease. Now, make no mistake. When you teach in a room full of kids, you're going to be exposed to so many different diseases for so many different reasons. I mean, it takes a while. I remember when my kids started going to school, we would have a cold run through the house, and then we'd have another one, and the distance between the various bouts of cold and sniffles and so on and so forth would get wider and wider and wider as everybody began to realize that everybody's immune system began to catch up. But here's the gist of this. The cards that were played regarding mask mandates and social distancing and so on were badly overplayed. It should not have been a mandate. It should have been a suggestion. There was no reason to proceed with this fascist-like enforcement of what was not law. It never was. It was essentially an exertion of emergency power. And so here we are in the midst of all of this, where people have finally had enough of this overplaying of the emergency idea. That's why when President Biden said he was going to declare a climate emergency, I said, no, he's not. He absolutely isn't. There are people who say, well, that's still in the works. No, it's not in the works. And there are reasons why that should never, ever happen. The least of which, perhaps, is the fact that if you declare an emergency over a political issue over and over and over again, people stop paying attention to emergencies because they aren't. You see, your political delirium not being carried out to your specifications, that is not an emergency. All of these people that are willing to absolutely ignore all of this stuff are not threats to democracy. They are threats to democracy, which is completely different. This is what happens when we start going down the road of hysteria in order to use hysteria as a political tool. Just my 2 cents. By all means, keep your kids at home, but homeschool them because they'll get a better education at this point. And don't worry about your kids. They're going to be just fine. You're listening to The Wells Report. We'll be back with more in just a moment. Glad you're here today. Thanks for being here. North to south, coast to coast, around the world, this is the Wells Report. Welcome to the broadcast. We do this every single day. We come up with 3 podcasts every day. We just finished up the first hour. We're starting hour number 2, and I want you to watch them all. We discussed important things last hour. We're going to discuss important things this hour. Join us. Be a part of this broadcast. Share it with your friends if you think it's valuable. Share it with your friends. Make sure you give us a nice like. That would be nice too. We'd appreciate it. So this just in, we were talking about President Biden's speech. And what ended up happening was that President Biden in that speech said something to the fact that he had cancer. Now, we haven't heard anything more from that. We haven't heard the White House walking that back at all. Don't know whether it was a gaffe or whether or not the president just told us that he has cancer. He was talking about the cancer rate in Delaware. And as a part of that speech, he was discussing how people who live near oil refineries have health problems. Okay. He went on to say this. This just in from Fox News. President Biden announced today he will be implementing a number of executive actions focused on combating climate change. The executive actions come after Senator Joe Manchin reportedly said he would not support a package for reconciliation that included climate change and energy. And so what ended up happening was the president said that he would take executive action. Included in the executive actions he's talking about is an effort to protect communities from extreme heat and dangerous climate impacts. It includes another $2.3 billion in funding for the Federal Emergency Management Agency's Building Resilience Infrastructure and Communities program in 2022. That is intended to help communities increase resilience to heat waves, drought, wildfires, floods, hurricanes, and other hazards by preparing before disaster strikes. Well, the first thing I thought about when I read that, by the way, the first thing I thought about when I read that was, well, California is going to get some money to finally do something about this unbelievable growth of what will be the next huge brush fire in Southern California by finally actually sending out more money to the states to be able to make up for bad governance and the overspending of money on other things besides actually things that keep people's houses from burning down. That was the first thing I thought about. Maybe that's just cynical on my part. The executive actions by the president also include an effort to lower cooling costs for communities who are suffering extreme heat, as the White House is issuing guidance that will assist states, tribes, and territories in their funding for community cooling centers, as well as helping people within their communities get access to cooling equipment. Additionally, the Biden administration will consider potential wind power projects in the Gulf of Mexico, which are being proposed off the coast of Galveston, Texas, off the coast of Lake Charles, Louisiana, also off the coasts of Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina to ensure these states will be able to benefit from good-paying jobs in the burgeoning offshore wind industry. Notably missing from this particular list would be wind farms off the coast of Massachusetts. You know, Martha's Vineyard. In order, by the way, to keep these from being seen by people on the shoreline, you have to have them 20 miles outside of the beach. When you go to the beach and you look out over the ocean, the edge of the horizon is 18 miles out. Considering the height of these windmills, they would go out about 20 miles. The only problem with all that is that's international water. And so in order to be able to do these, you have to be inside the waters, the claimed waters of any particular country, which is 12 miles. And so you'll be able to look out there and see the seagulls and those gigantic wind turbines. So the White House estimates the projects will have the potential to power over 3 million homes with what they call, quote, clean energy, unquote. President Biden is also directing the Secretary of the Interior to advance clean energy development off the coasts of those states that I mentioned and hopefully create some jobs while he's doing it. Biden said while announcing the executive actions in Somerset, Massachusetts, he's standing in Massachusetts, but not talking about wind farms off the coast of Massachusetts. He said that climate change is an emergency. Listen carefully. This is an emergency, and an emergency that I will look at, and I will look at it that way. This is an emergency, and I will look at it that way. As I said last week, I'll say it again loud and clear. As president, I'll use my executive powers to combat climate change, the climate crisis, in the absence of congressional action. A senior White House administration official said the climate crisis is an urgent challenge, adding that what has already been unleashed in terms of climate is devastating. Well, this falls well short of declaring a national emergency. This is a very careful way of saying this. The president's going to consider it an emergency. And so he's going to justify that self-proclaimed emergency, that self-believed emergency, in making these executive decisions. The problem with those executive decisions is that there are things he can do that don't run afoul of law. But you're not going to be able to put up wind farms without the Congress. You're simply not going to be able to do it. And once again, you're talking about, okay, so now you've got the wind farms out there off the coast. Let's talk a little bit about how we're going to get that power inland. In places, like I said, places like Lake Charles, Louisiana, that's the Gulf of Mexico. So the Gulf of Mexico might be in a situation where you could go out further than the 12-mile international limit. Because essentially, for all intents and purposes, that is United States territorial water. The thing about that is that if you make that assumption, then the Straits of Taiwan would be, for example, Chinese territorial water. I'm talking about Red China. I'm not talking about Taiwan. So there are a lot of things here that need to be looked at, not the least of which is we have so many other emergencies that have nothing to do with windmills everywhere. And by the way, going back to the 14th century for your technology to be able to generate electricity seems a little bit strange to me. But this, what I consider to be badly thought of or thought about war on petrochemical, petroleum, natural gas, and coal is ruinous. It's simply ruinous. It's not going to work. It simply isn't. Earlier today on USA Today, President Joe Biden announced modest steps to address climate change after his legislative agenda to combat the crisis faced a setback in Congress. The actions that we just announced, courtesy of Fox News, will be followed by additional steps soon and to come as lawmakers appear unlikely to move on climate change. It is not an emergency. Climate is not an emergency. This is my opinion. Climate, in this particular case, can be better described by using the word summer. Senator Joe Manchin, the Democrat from West Virginia, last week rejected a Democrat plan to combat climate change and raise taxes on the wealthiest Americans and corporations through a pending domestic policy package. Biden needs the backing of all 50 Democrat senators to use a legislative maneuver that prevents Republicans from blocking the package. He said, "This is an emergency. I will look at it that way." He can't declare it because it's not an emergency. And if he does, he will get immediate and effective pushback on that assertion. Your failure to enact what is I've described as delirium from a green energy standpoint is not an emergency. It simply isn't. Biden announced his new executive actions during a visit to a former coal-fired power plant in Somerset, Massachusetts, one of the states not on the list to have an offshore wind farm. But the thing about that power plant is the property was used to create a manufacturing hub for cables that support the state's offshore wind industry. Fighting the heat, Biden's plan includes a $2.3 billion program that helps communities deal with heat waves, floods, wildfires, and other extreme weather events. The program prioritizes serving historically disadvantaged communities. Biden is also broadening the low income home energy assistance program to give states more options for how to spend the federal funds to keep low income people cool. The most at risk from growing consequences of climate change are marginalized communities of Black, Latino, Indigenous, and Asian Americans who are disproportionately located near sources of pollution or lack the means to protect themselves and access health care, according to a 2021 study. In the latest steps the administration has taken to expand offshore wind energy, the Interior Department is proposing areas in the Gulf of Mexico for wind turbines. Biden also wants the department to move ahead on wind energy development off the coasts of Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. By the way, off the coast of North Carolina, off the coast of Cape Hatteras, whatever they build there better be made out of strong stuff, because that's one of the meanest parts of the Atlantic seaboard. The wind that blows out there is outrageous. It's just amazing to watch. Biden said he will announce additional executive actions in the coming weeks. One potential action is declaring a climate emergency. I can't see that happening, which would allow such steps as redirecting spending to renewable energy production. President Biden did not do that today. National Climate Advisor Gina McCarthy said that he held off because he wanted to outline actions, not just declare things. That's interesting. It was just important for the president to get his arms around the various threads of work that we can put together and lay them out in a way that he's comfortable with, she told reporters traveling with President Biden to Massachusetts, where advocates displayed a large red banner that read, "Declare National Climate Emergency." No, that trial balloon popped almost immediately. It's not going anywhere. Biden's announcement comes after he faced increased pressure from climate activists and some Democrats on Capitol Hill, after Manchin said he would not support the domestic policy package if it did have provisions for climate change. Biden said he won't back down and would issue climate executive actions. Declaring a climate emergency is one of the top steps the Congressional Progressive Caucus wants Biden to take to address this issue. The problem with that is once again, what isn't an emergency? If you start using national emergencies to forward your political agenda, then what isn't a national emergency? Any idea? The answer is everything is a national emergency. Yeah. So here's something else. Our economy is at risk, so we have to act. Our economy is at risk? Really? Today, Biden said that climate change is an emergency, but we're sick of watching this administration fail to treat it as such, said the Sunrise Movement. Barshini Prakash is the executive director. The head of the American Clean Power Association applauded Biden's actions to boost offshore wind, but association CEO Heather Zykal said that Biden is limited in what he can do through executive authority. It's clearer that we have not met our energy's targets at the speed we must. There's more coming up. Stay right there. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. I ran across something in that USA Today article that I wanted to double check. And that was this part of this article. President Biden announced these new executive actions during a visit to a former coal-fired power plant in Somerset, Massachusetts. It is becoming a manufacturing hub for cables to support the state's offshore wind industry. There is no offshore wind industry in Massachusetts. Every time they try to build it, an awful lot of very rich people say, no, you're not going to do that in my backyard. And so far, they've been able to stop everything. Now, there have been 4 leases that have been bid on, but there is no offshore wind power generation off the coast of Massachusetts yet. All that is paperwork. What I find interesting here is the journalism around it. This particular factory that is on the site of a former coal-fired power plant is described as a manufacturing hub for cables to support the state's offshore wind industry that at this particular moment does not exist. They've been trying for years and years and years. But the people of Massachusetts, nope, they're just not going to let that happen. Now, what about these other states? Well, there you go. They also talk about putting these things on the outer continental shelf. Remember that little geography lesson where I told you that the horizon at the ocean is 18 miles out? Yeah, well, the international waters begin at 12 miles off your coast. The outer continental shelf is like 50 miles off the coast. Sorry. Once again, this is very interesting to me. It's very interesting that this stuff is almost reported as opposed to being actually reported. It is my hope that at some point that's going to stop. There was a bill that has been put together. A bipartisan group of senators have come up with a bill to change election laws in response to the January 6th attack. A bipartisan group of senators reached a deal to make it harder to overturn a certified presidential election, marking the most significant response by Congress to former President Donald Trump's, quote, relentless pressure campaign to overturn the results, unquote, of the 2020 presidential election. The proposal needs to be approved by both chambers of Congress. It will need 60 votes in the Senate to break any filibuster attempt. That means at least 10 Republicans would be needed to support any legislation. Announcement of the plan kicks off what is expected to be a challenging, months-long process to get the deal passed into law before the end of the year. The deal is the culmination of months of negotiation led by Republican Senator Susan Collins of Maine and Democrat Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, along with an additional 6 Democrats and 8 Republicans. The proposal unveiled today is split up into 2 bills. One of the bills is focused on modernizing and overhauling the Electoral Count Act, an 1877 law that President Trump sought to exploit and create confusion over how Congress counts electoral college votes from each state. As part of that proposal, senators are attempting to clarify the vice president only has a ceremonial role in overseeing the certification of the electoral results. The proposal also includes key provisions intended to promote an orderly transition of presidential power by outlining guidelines for when eligible candidates can receive federal resources for transition into office. If neither candidate concedes within 5 days of Election Day, both candidates would be able to receive additional federal transition resources until, quote, it is substantially certain who will win the majority of the electoral votes. That according to a fact sheet. Ultimately, only one candidate will be eligible when there is a, quote, clear winner of the election, unquote. This from CNN, by the way. So once again, this is something that's happening. It is not something that has happened. We will keep our eyes on it. And because we have our eyes on it, you will have yours as well on this broadcast. You're listening to the Wells Report. I am John David Wells. Wednesday in progress. Halfway through the work week. It happened at noon, by the way, in case you're wondering. Halfway through the work week as we continue with the news, the facts, analysis, and commentary and debate. Join us back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. I am John David Wells. Hour number 2. We've got one in the can, and you can see it at your favorite social media site. More about that coming up a little bit later on. Also, by the way, you can interact with this broadcast. This broadcast is mainly about news, unfortunately, because the news seems to be chock full of politics. So is this show. It is not something that I intend. It's not something I'm trying to do. It's just that as we face this particular moment of American history, what we face is we face politics doing far more than it was ever intended to by the Constitution of the United States. These people don't know what they're doing. We have proof every single day. And once again, that gets back to what I keep talking about. We have the wrong people running the country. Let's do something about that. We've got an election coming up here in about 100 days. We're about 90 days out from the 2022 elections. Can we please start sending people we know up there as opposed to people that we know don't know what they're doing? I mean, can we please do that? You can interact with this by calling me on the telephone, which is at 817-379-2172. You can also get in contact with us via chat. We've been talking a little bit about this emergency, not emergency, regarding climate as announced by the President of the United States today. And we were talking, the people in the chat room are talking a little bit about what this wind farm stuff is all about. So one of the things that people don't understand is that these turbines kill birds by the bushel basketful. It is so notorious. There's a wind farm near Palm Springs, California. It's called Dead Bird Gulch. Because if you've ever had a pet bird, you can have two things in your house. You can have a pet bird that you allow to fly around the house, or you can have ceiling fans. You can't have both. You can't have both. Because birds get smacked around by ceiling fans, and it's horrible to watch, and you really don't want to have it happen. So there's that. The other thing you would need to keep in mind is that these turbines, they don't work all the time. One of the reasons why Texas has such a problem with electricity, at least as talked about by ERCOT was depending on wind-generated electricity so that they didn't have to call for blackouts and brownouts around Texas, because they were thinking that the actual wind turbines were going to provide more electricity than they did. Because, and there's no real reason why. There was a reason, say, for example, in the winter of 2021, because there was so much snow and so much ice, the turbines actually froze up. But here, the reason that the wind turbines didn't make any wind is because the wind isn't blowing. But didn't make any electricity is because the wind isn't blowing. That happens. And so once again, can we have reliable energy, please? That would be fine. So this is, yes, a hot summer in contrast with last summer, which was pretty darn nice around here. That was a really nice summer, especially in comparison to this one. Yvonne said, I remember when the Kennedys didn't want a wind farm off the coast where they lived, Martha's Vineyard, even though it wasn't the site of their land, that they considered it ugly. They considered the idea of having to look out across the ocean and seeing wind turbines to be ugly. There you go. Those wind farms cause more environmental disturbance than coal and natural gas. This is insane. I thought Trump was supposed to be the executive order president. Well, that's a good point. Then Flem Coughley pointed this out. So the president is going to consider climate an emergency in the United States, huh? Can someone please explain what the emergency is? Something specific we can point to. We can't. No one can. Because there is no emergency as we see it. We're talking about 10 years from now, when the entire Earth is going to implode because the 0.06% of carbon dioxide is going to, remain at 0.06%, but the entire Earth is going to implode. If that's the case, and if we're in a situation where the only people that can save us from this are politicians, we're all doomed. So let's just sit in our front yards with our chaise lounges naked and drink Cuba Libres. I mean, it's not going to, there's not much more we can do, is there? There's just not. Anyway, so I thought I would let you know that there is indeed a chat room. By the way, they were wondering about that electoral college bill that I was just talking about. A bipartisan group of senators came up with this idea that probably isn't going to go anywhere. All I can say is the VP cannot contest the election results anyway. Correct. He cannot. It is a ceremonial counting. It's just essentially a notification the Electoral College has voted, and it happens in front of the Congress. By the time it gets to the Congress, it's over. And in order to come up with a bill that essentially says the same thing is simple political posturing, in case you're wondering. The hammer, not the lawyer hammer, the real hammer, okay? A guy I served with in 4th Regiment QRT. He said, it's summertime. It's supposed to be hot. A record broken now means it was just as hot when the original record was set. This is correct. Thank you, Hammer. I appreciate your time. So this happened, and I think you need to know about it. This happened. This was kind of interesting. Dan Cox. Let me make sure. Yeah. Dan Cox is described by USA Today as a far-right state legislator. He was endorsed by President Donald Trump, and he has won the Republican primary for Maryland governor. That happened yesterday. He defeated a moderate rival backed by outgoing Governor Larry Hogan. USA Today reports that despite being a win for President Trump, Cox's victory over former Hogan cabinet member Kelly Schultz could be a blow to Republican chances to hold on to the seat in November. Hogan, who was prohibited from running for a third consecutive term, was a rare two-term Republican governor in a heavily Democrat state. He had endorsed Schultz as the successor of his bipartisan style of leadership. Remind me to talk about bipartisanship. Cox will face the winner of the Democrat primary in November in the general election. Wes Moore, a best-selling author backed by Oprah Winfrey, had an early lead Tuesday night. The focus started to turn to mail ballots that won't be counted until later in the week. Yeah, you see, we have to figure out how many votes we need to be able to assure a victory of a particular Democrat candidate. Therefore, we have to have extra time after Election Day. Yeah. Yeah, there's no real fraud in our elections. None at all. No. The Republican primary was mainly a proxy battle between President Trump and former Governor Hogan, or he's still the governor, who offered vastly different visions of the party's future as they continued 2024 campaigns for the White House. Hogan, one of Trump's most prominent GOP critics, urged the party to move on from his divisive brand of politics, while Trump spent much of his post-presidency lifting candidates who embraced his policies. One of the candidates was Cox, who organized busloads of protesters to Washington for the Stop the Steal rally that preceded the January 6th, as USA Today reports it, insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. Cox also said President Joe Biden's victory shouldn't have been certified. He called former Vice President Mike Pence a traitor and sought unsuccessfully to impeach Hogan for his pandemic policies. By the way, for those people who are supporters of President Trump, you really need to back away from calling Mike Pence a traitor. You need to back away from saying that Mike Pence should have been hung, for example. You probably should do all of that. And the reason you should probably do all of that is because it's not true. None of it is. In fact, Mike Pence is one hell of an American politician. He's perhaps one of the most professional politicians I've ever seen. The only time he ever blew it was when he was debating Kamala Harris in the vice presidential debate leading up to the 2020 election. That's the only time he actually betrayed that amazing cool that he has. Mike Pence is not a bad guy. Now, is he a creature of the system? Yes. Is he a politician? Yes. Does he view everything through a political lens? Yes. Yes. But I have a great deal of respect for Mike Pence. And what's most important is not necessarily to look backwards in the rearview mirror regarding Mike Pence and his conduct of himself, because what he did was the right thing to do. And say things like he should be hung and he's a traitor and he's this and he's that. That's just shrill garbage that is bad for everyone. Everyone. All right. So let's make sure that we can try to tamp that down a little bit. I think that would be a very, very good idea. Let's see. Democrats were happy that Mr. Cox won that election. They, like I said, the Democrat Governors Association was the instrumental in putting, I guess, a few $1 million in ads supporting Dan Cox because they think they can beat him in November. Now, this is kind of disturbing to me. It really kind of bugs me that what will end up happening is that a political party will promote what they consider to be a weaker candidate. This is a distortion of American politics. It should stop. You know, you really don't want to do this. Now, Republicans are also kind of famous for that. The late, great Rush Limbaugh once talked about something he called Operation, what was it? It was Operation Chaos, where he encouraged Republicans in states where you weren't locked into a particular primary based on your declaration of political affiliation. You could vote, it's an open primary, you can vote for anybody. Well, this is the Democrat response to Operation Chaos. It is chaos. It creates a mess. Now, all I can hope is that a few of these people that have been promoted by the Democrat Party who are Republicans, I hope that a bunch of them win. And that's the natural way of things. You know, somebody comes up with this great idea. Here, let's promote this guy that can't possibly be elected. Let's promote him and then put a candidate up there. We'll create like an opposite party straw man. Well, one of these times, if not all of these times, what's going to end up happening is people like Dan Cox are going to get elected. I don't know about Dan Cox. I don't. All I know is that he gets to say what he wants. He gets to believe as he believes. That's called America. I don't know whether or not he'd be a great governor or not because I don't live in Maryland. I live in Texas. And it's a lot easier to flesh out the people who are really, really good at being governor as opposed to the people that are really, really bad at being governor, especially in the upcoming gubernatorial election here in Texas. The candidates that we've seen so far, Greg Abbott is going to win that election. It is. Because Beto O'Rourke is a charlatan. He's a carpetbagging guy. When I talk about Beto O'Rourke, I'm talking about the tall, skinny Irish kid from El Paso, not the pseudo-Latino. I don't know why people do that. You know, if a Republican tried to do that, he'd be guilty of cultural misappropriation, but not in the case of Beto O'Rourke. Okay, Beto, whatever you say. He also is simply unconstitutional. You know, he's an anti-Second Amendment guy in Texas. Seriously? Good luck. And I mean that not good luck. I mean the opposite of good luck. I mean sarcasm, not good luck. What's the matter with you? If you don't like the United States, go someplace else. Leave the United States to people who believe in the Constitution. You obviously don't. By the way, I can tell you the electioneering surrounding Beto O'Rourke has always been spectacular. A while back, he ran for the United States Senate seat currently being held by Ted Cruz. And that campaign was a work of art. Now, this was before he ran for president and essentially destroyed the rest of his political career. But I kept getting calls from his campaign. And I was terribly impressed with what they were saying and how they did it and so on and so forth. I told him so. I mean, that was a model for successful campaigning in the new age. They really came up with a lot of things. Did he lose? Yeah, he lost. But the thing about it is that still, when you get into this electioneering stuff, as long as you keep it real, it's fine. But when you start trying to promote what you consider to be a weaker candidate, you are traipsing on the edge of disaster. Will that happen in Maryland? I don't know. But I certainly hope that it does. I certainly hope that Dan Cox is the next governor, and I certainly hope that all these people came up with a bright idea, the Democrats came up with a bright idea of promoting him, pay the price. This is the Wells Report. Back with more in just a moment. You are listening to the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172, 817-379-2172. So COVID-19 is still with us. The BA.5 subvariant of Omicron continues to dominate the summer wave of COVID-19 in the U.S. It makes up nearly 80% of new cases, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and their nowcast model. In the most recent weeks, ending Wednesday, 29 states reported more cases than the week before, a USA Today analysis of Johns Hopkins University data shows. Once again, the CDC has essentially co-opted Johns Hopkins to do all of its talking for them. This information should be coming from the CDC. But the CDC is now a political organization instead of a public health organization. And so this little arrangement is a way to essentially get information out without having to actually be responsible for it. It's slovenly. It's unbelievable. It's craven. It's awful. Hospitals in 35 states reported more COVID-19 patients, while hospitals in 25 states had more patients in intensive care beds. This according to Health and Human Services data. Now, what I want to tell you about this data is you'll notice that there are no hard numbers as to how many cases we're talking about. 80% of the new cases are the BA.5 variant. Okay. How many cases is that? Well, we don't know because that data is not being published by USA Today. Why? Because, once again, facts don't actually matter. This is the bias and analysis part of the news. Facts don't actually matter. 80% of new cases are BA.5. Oh, okay. Out of how many cases? They don't say. They don't say. Then they go on to extrapolate. 29 states reported more cases than the week before. Well, what are the numbers? Then, of course, we've already brought up the fact that the CDC is abdicating its responsibilities for public health and turning them over to Johns Hopkins University. USA Today analyzed Johns Hopkins University data for this newscast, for this news report. Then they said hospitals in 35 states reported more COVID-19 patients. Again, how many are we talking here? Hospitals in 25 states had more patients in intensive care beds, according to Health and Human Services data. Oh, okay. Now, are those people, because this doesn't make anything clear, are those people in intensive care beds because of COVID-19? Or are they just talking about how many people are in intensive care beds? See, this is the structure of American journalism right now. They don't tell you the actual information that you need. And then they go on and say, well, BA.5 was first detected in the U.S. at the end of April, I guess to give you something to read so that you don't ask the questions I just asked. The subvariant was first seen in South Africa, but that doesn't mean it arrived to the U.S. from South Africa, said David Dowdy, an epidemiologist at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Researchers can't know where it came from due to limited surveillance. The first cases appeared in the Northeast, started spreading during the months to southern, Midwestern, and Western states. It's been sort of a slow rise since that time. It's taken about 2 months to get to the current state where we think BA.5 probably accounts for 2/3 of all COVID cases now. Again, hard data missing. No real actual case counts. This is propaganda. That's what this is. And so it's pretty sad when it's just as easy to include that data. But then again, you can't propel American hysteria to the level that you need it to be able to sort of get people revved up for the idea that they might have to be socially distancing again and wearing masks again. By the way, Ann points out, how is it that they know? Well, the actual work that's being done is genetic. It's behind the scenes. The COVID-19 test that you take, the one with the little plastic thing where you get 1 line or 2 lines, et cetera, that's essentially sensing coronavirus. And it can be any coronavirus. Like I said, I took 3 COVID-19 shots, Moderna COVID-19 shots. I'm considering a 4th, but I'm trying to figure out why. Anthony Fauci, after ruining people's lives by saying you simply have to be vaccinated, and if you're not, you should lose your job, which actually happened, now says that vaccine didn't work overly well. Well, thank you, doctor. And then he, by the way, rescinded his idea that he's planning on retiring. He's planning on stepping away from the post that he currently is in. Good. But he's going to stay in the fight. Darn. Flem says, yeah, more scare tactics to frighten people to vote by mail or by ballot drop-off. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, if they say 100% increase, does that mean that there was 1 case before and now there are 2 cases? Yeah. That's exactly my point. No hard data. Why? because they don't want you to know the hard data. Why? Because the hard data would probably have you go, meh, so what? And once again, a political enterprise, a political agenda that runs on hysteria can't afford to run short. Look, you got to die of something. If it's COVID-19, it's COVID-19. If it's a car hitting you, it's a car hitting you. All right? But to use this as a political tool, well, that's far more dangerous than the disease itself, don't you think? This is the Wells Report. So we'll be back for hour number 3 coming up in just a couple of seconds. Once again, thanks very much for being with us. Thank you for joining us. North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Every day, for 3 hours, we give you a breakdown of the daily news. We report the news. We analyze that news for fact. Precious few facts in today's journalism, as you know. Then what we do after we report the news, we analyze the news. I draw the contrast between the facts and the news. I also point out bias. Then we make commentary. The commentary is my opinion. It is not news. Your opinion and my opinion, worth equally much. They are equal. Please share yours, and that's the debate part. If I say something you don't agree with, call me. If I say something you do agree with, but I left something out in your opinion, call me. 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. And then you can also take part in a very cool chat that is going on right now through the auspices of YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch. I continually check the chat room and I bring up the chats. So by all means, take part in that as well. Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, as you know, has been essentially inundated with protesters outside of his house. He being the object of the left's ire when dealing with something called the correction of a bad Supreme Court decision in 1973 with a better one in 2022. That decision to return the Roe v. Wade so-called rights to the states was extremely proper from a constitutional standpoint, meaning that the first decision was badly decided. It was judicial activism from the word go. You do not get to amend the Constitution and add rights to the Constitution except by constitutional amendment. We've talked about the political difficulties of getting something like that done, and they are immense. You can legislate it, which is being done at various levels for various reasons. The House of Representatives has passed 3 bills at this particular moment that enshrine the so-called rights of Roe v. Wade, the original decision, in some form of law. Will they pass constitutional muster? I don't know. But the federal government supports the states. The state governments support the people. That's federalism. Brett Kavanaugh became the center point for the protesting after his address and the address of the other conservative justices who are the basic proponents of this particular Roe v. Wade decision, the new one. He is deluged with protesters outside of his house. Well, now those protesters are expanding their protesting. The neighbors of Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh are now fed up with the actions of protesters near their homes, as some engage in pro-choice activism have chosen to personally target residents rather than heed noise complaints. Now, one last thing. This is an opinion part of this. I want to make sure you understand this is opinion now. It's interesting to me that when the mainstream media describes people who are pro-life, they are mostly described as pro-abortion. And yet, the people that are pro-abortion are described as pro-choice. And the reason is, once again, to soft pedal the ugliness of the entire issue. When I do my reporting, I simply report it as pro-abortion forces. And I will continue to, because that's what they are. They're pro-abortion. Now, that's not something that I'm intending to foist my opinion on. That is simply done for clarity. But the double standard that we have often discussed on this broadcast, especially when it comes to news reporting in the United States, this hypocrisy has to end. In other words, if you say pro-abortion, or if you say pro or anti-abortion, you have to say pro-abortion. If you say pro-life, then say pro-choice. But you don't get to have it both ways. That's just something that I wanted to bring up. I've tried to bring that up a couple of different times. I wanted to clarify it today. Getting back to the neighbors being fed up with the protesters surrounding Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh's home, in June, Fox News spoke with neighbors who painted a picture of protesters who were loud, intimidating, threatening escalation if they don't get what they want. Furthermore, neighbors claimed that protesters had abused them and their children, using drums and megaphones to chant F you and F your children. How nice. A Wednesday piece from the Washington Post showed that little has changed in 2 months. The paper spoke with 8 different sources from the neighborhood. 7 of them voiced frustrations about the protests, citing jarring language and rising tensions. So a law got passed that was written in the Senate and then truculently passed by the House that would supply actual protection for the Supreme Court justices and all the federal judiciary and their families from this level of abuse. Why it's continuing is because, well, now they have to vote on a bill to actually fund the thing, and they haven't done that yet. Near as I can tell, I haven't heard that the bill to fund all of these activities had been passed, which gave, of course, the law enforcement people who are charged with enforcing the law, whether they agree with it or not, it gave them more time to not enforce the law. More about that in just a moment. Residents in some cases have attempted to confront protesters over their methods. They were quickly excoriated, which is the way fascism works. Lyric Winnick noticed that the people that were actual fascists and actually using fascist tactics to be able to get through what they want, in other words, not afraid to descend into mob tactics, just plain intimidation and violence if necessary. She said they were called, she said, the Lyric Winnick is her name. The protesters call the neighbors fascists. Taking a page out of the rules for radicals, accuse others of what you yourself are doing. Nothing about this is healthy. We've got kids on the street scared to leave their homes. True. She noted a vast majority of people in the neighborhood believe protesters have, quote, gotten out of control, unquote. Calls to reduce the noise have been met with even louder responses, including a new chant that labels neighbors as Karens, a pejorative term frequently targeting white women of privilege. Winnick said she believes that their actions are counterproductive to their pro-choice message. I do think they're hurting their own cause. They absolutely are. Emily Strulson, a 46-year-old pro-abortion artist that lives in the neighborhood, has also come to view the protesters as disturbing. The Supreme Court recent decision to overturn Roe v. Wade saw women chalk out a message on her driveway, which read, reproduction rights are human rights. Strulson, what they should be saying is pro-abortion rights are human rights. Strulson's history with the pro-choice movement and with activism in general goes far back. She and her mother marched for abortion rights on the National Mall when she was in middle school. However, Strulson told the Post she's reached her breaking point. Last Wednesday, protests became so loud and vulgar she was forced to leave her home with her family for a long night out to dinner. I know where their passion comes from, but I've had enough. Tensions in the Chevy Chase neighborhood of Washington, D.C. reached dangerous levels last month. A California man was charged with attempted assassination of Brett Kavanaugh. The man dressed in black arrived by taxi after 1 a.m. in the neighborhood. The individual told police he was planning on killing Kavanaugh then himself over the leaked draft opinion indicating Supreme Court would overturn Roe v. Wade. He had a Glock 17, ammunition, pepper spray, duct tape, a knife, wrecking bar, and so on and so on. And so once again, here we are with these true fascists trying to intimidate, trying to essentially render, shall we say, an intimidating, fearful response on the people that they're protesting. And why wouldn't they? Listen to this. A Harvard law instructor This is the headline on Fox News. Harvard Law instructor says Supreme Court justices who overturned Roe should never know peace again. A Harvard Law School instructor tweeted the Supreme Court justices who overturned Roe v. Wade should, quote, never know peace again, unquote. Harvard Law School cyber law clinical instructor Alejandra Caraballo made the comments in a tweet thread on June 25th, stating the Supreme Court justices who overturned Roe v. Wade in a decision that was announced on June 24th are, quote, pariahs, unquote. Only if the mob says so, by the way. The six justices, her quote continues, the six justices who overturned Roe should never know peace again. It is our civic duty to accost them every time they're in public. They are pariahs. Since women don't have their rights, these justices should never have a peaceful moment in public again. Does she want some of these justices assassinated? You know, that's the only thing I could come up with. You know, I was thinking about this and I'm going, well, they know they're setting the table for egregious violence. Why do they keep doing it? It's even been proven. Maxine Waters famously talks about how Republicans are, okay, pariahs. And before you know it, some guy shoots up the Republican Party baseball team. And actually badly injures people. She went on to say this Harvard Law School instructor also said the Supreme Court is coming for much more than Roe v. Wade. They're coming for contraception, same-sex marriage, the ability to criminalize LGBTQ people again. Many of those justices feel the unease, insecurity, and anxiety they seek to inflict on us. May those justices feel the unease, insecurity, and anxiety they seek to inflict on us. Well, okay, that's the us has to be defined here in my view. So let me go over here. The us is, okay, so are you of childbearing age? Are you of childbearing age? Your unease and insecurity, there's not much we can do about that. Anxiety, same thing. Those are all self-created feelings. The Supreme Court can't make or break any of those. That's up to you. So once again, okay, you can have all these anxieties all you want to. And then that takes us down the road to exactly the big problem in all of this. Contraception, same-sex marriage, the ability to criminalize LGBTQ people again, well, that's just hyperbole. But contraception and same-sex marriage, they're not going anywhere. They're not. But the Supreme Court of the United States needs to actually correct the fact that those laws should be determined by the states in a constitutional republic called the United States of America. There will be overreach. The ramifications of this decision are going to roil American society for quite some time, as all of these things continue to be shaken out. People will go too far, they will be diselected. People won't go far enough, they will be diselected. The people will choose, and the Supreme Court justice only makes this, the Supreme Court decision only makes that possible. Back in just a moment. You are listening to the Wells Report. I am John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. This is somewhat interesting. A pro-choice group that is coordinating protests targeting churches has been accused by Fox News of having links to the Revolutionary Communist Party. I know, knock you over with a feather. Rise Up for Abortion Rights. Rise Up, the number 4, abortion rights, is among the far-left groups that have organized Mother's Day protests against churches in response to the Supreme Court ruling regarding Roe v. Wade. Several cities will be hosting protests outside of prominent churches in their towns. They can look like a group of people holding signs wearing Handmaid's Tale outfits, passing out flyers outside the churchgoers and doing a die-in. The group posted a video of a protest it organized against St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City. That happened Sunday, calling the church, quote, a symbol for the enslavement of women. The protests targeting churches were listed as a part of Rise Up for Abortion Rights Week of Action, which it says is meant to pressure the Supreme Court to change their mind. The online sign-up form for Rise Up for Abortion Rights discloses the group is a project of refusefascism.org. Refusefascism.org is an offshoot of the Revolutionary Communist Party, as the communist group has acknowledged, and was launched in response to former President Donald Trump's victory in the 2016 election. Rise Up for Abortion Rights appears to be hoping to generate so much public unrest the Supreme Court will be intimidated and will thus, in some way, shape, or form, change their ideas regarding further decision-making. Rise Up for Abortion Rights says it aims to create a situation where those who run the society have to fear the loss of legitimacy if they go forward with revoking abortion rights. It's a lot simpler than that. They're trying to create hate and miscontent among the society so they can profit from it politically. And that's when the real fascism starts. And by the way, while we're about this, these people are not real picky about who they protest. Pro-abortion activists have been protesting at churches and the homes of Supreme Court justices over the Roe v. Wade decision. They have a new target on the agenda: House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. The left-wing group Ruth Sent Us announced yesterday that protesters from multiple pro-abortion groups are descending on Pelosi's San Francisco home and demanding that she investigate the corrupt justices and, quote, save abortion. Well, at least they're honest. We'll be marching to the front door of Pelosi's Pack Heights mansion to demand hashtag save abortion Nancy, hashtag defend Roe, Ruth Sent Us tweeted. The group accused Pelosi of careless and cowardly leadership in the face of the Republican Party's scorched earth policy. Shrill, hyperbolic, just plain intimidating. That's the language they're using. We have had careless and cowardly representation by Pelosi, the group wrote. The GOP followed a scorched earth strategy with endless Benghazi hearings and ACA appeals, repeals rather. But she passed endless bills that lay on Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's desk and refused to hold hearings on Trumpian crimes. While nauseating, Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh was nominated in 2018. Democrats knew he was a Bush campaign operative who had perjured himself in previous confirmation hearings. He's also a known alcoholic and a gambler. His serial sexual assaults came to light. He was still seated on the Supreme Court of the United States. It's my hope that Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh immediately starts suing these people for libel and slander. He'd win. Once again, you are being manipulated by communists. Keep that in mind. Just reporting the news. This is the Wells Report. Back with more in just a moment. Thanks for being here today. This is the Wells Report. I am John David Wells. About 500 miles, 400 miles or so south of this location is the border between the state of Texas, and Mexico. The responsibility for keeping that border secure rests, according to the Constitution, with the federal government. As you know, that border is anything but secure. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas yesterday claimed that the southern border is secure, even as Border Patrol agents are facing historic migrant numbers. Mayorkas spoke at the Aspen Security Forum, where he was asked about the situation on the southern border, which has seen more than 200,000 migrant encounters a month for the last 4 months, 239,000 this month alone. When he was asked about it, he said this, quote, "Look, the border is secure. We are working to make the border more secure. That has been an historic challenge." He also used the question to take aim at lawmakers who have said they will not pass comprehensive immigration legislation. A number of Republicans have said that they would not consider legislation that includes a pathway to citizenship for illegal immigrants already in the country until the border crisis ends. Once again, that is not the issue. The lack of a solution serves both political parties. All that Republicans are saying on those particulars, according in my particular point of view, I hit the button, it didn't move. Anyway, in my particular point of view, I happen to believe that is a stall tactic. That's all it is. It is a way to postpone what should be a very straightforward legislative move. Put a pathway out there. Here's the pathway. In case you don't know, I've talked about this many, many times. The pathway is simple. Let's say there are 20 million immigrants in the United States of America. Pass a law that says when this law is passed, what we're going to do is we're going to open up in the consulates of the United States in the originating countries of all those 20 million people a way for them to apply for a work permit to work in the United States of America. They have to prove where they live now in the United States. They have to prove where they lived in their originating country. They have to prove clean criminal records in both countries. And then what they do is they can go down there and then get this work permit and they can drive across the border in a car of their choice instead of having to depend on some coyote who's going to use their daughters as sex toys or just outright kidnap them for the sex trade, use them for drug mules or any other horrifying atrocities that are going on at that border. And I've seen them myself. You just drive back. It's good for 2 years. You can renew it once online for 2 more years, provided, of course, you have clean records in the United States. After the second time, you have to go back to your originating country. You go to the head of the line at the U.S. consulate, you get your renewal, and you come back. Regarding the pathway to citizenship, you got to have one of those cards. If you're not here legally, then you got to have one of those cards. You got to have that work permit to be able to base a claim for citizenship in the United States, thereby creating a pathway to citizenship. Well, John David, why would people who are here living illegally, why would they go back to their countries to get this? Because 180 days after this bill is passed and put into action, then Immigrations and Customs Enforcement starts to go to these jobs, to go to these work sites. And you better have a visa that allows you to work in the United States. You better be a naturalized citizen. You had better have one of these work permit cards, or the CEO of the country will be charged with a federal misdemeanor and sent to jail for 180 days. If he gets caught again, that's a felony. So what he's going to do is he's going to tell his workforce, you guys got to go get these. Maybe he'll even help them. I don't know. But that is the impetus. That is how you get this done. They go down to their originating country. They come back with a work permit. They're good for 2 years. It's a pathway to citizenship. All of the taxes that they generate, what we pay as FICA, for Social Security, all their taxes does not go into a Social Security account for them. It goes into Social Security for us. That's how they pay their fine, which should be somewhere around $25,000. So their FICA taxes go as a way to pay their fine. It's already taken out of their check. It just goes to Social Security to help fund the people that they're taking advantage of by living here illegally. That's a simple situation that will solve all of this in about 180 days. Because that gives 6 months to all these employers that have all these people, gives them 6 months to go ahead and get something done. They can send their workforce in shifts and waves so they can keep their businesses going. It solves every single problem. And it stops illegal immigration into this country. Now, as far as the rest of it goes, once again, we have to return to the immigration policies of the past. If you want to come to the United States, you have to prove that you can support yourself. You have to prove that you have a clean criminal record. You have to give us biometric information. You have to have a sponsor in the United States. And those are the people that, once you get this going, it takes care of itself. That's what the Department of Homeland Security should be doing. They should be administrating this. God knows they have the money. That's how you fix this. But this crazy, no, the border is secure. No, it's not. No, it's not. Terrorists, contraband of all kinds, not just drugs. But fentanyl is chemical warfare. Where is that chemical warfare originating from? Well, the Republic of China. Red China. That's where all that stuff is made. It's made as counterfeit. It's made as counterfeit other drugs. Other drugs are counterfeited with fentanyl in them. 2 milligrams will kill you. 2 milligrams. That's a chemical attack on the United States. Nobody says a word about it. Nobody says a word about it. Nobody's wised up to the fact that, once again, we have the wrong people in Congress. The Wells Report Immigration Act can be handled in about a month. 6 months from its passage, it can be law. And it covers everything. Why is it that I can sit in the studio in my house and figure that stuff out, but these guys can't? I'll tell you why. It's not that they can't, it's that they won't. When Donald Trump was running for the presidency in 2016, I called the campaign and I said, you need a real immigration program, because he was being lambasted in the press for not having one. So I called his expert on immigration, and he says, "No, we're not going to have that tag you're it system. We're just not going to do that." Thereby perpetuating the problem instead of solving it. I really like this idea. I really do. I'm proud of it. But what's fascinating to me is that so many people can listen to it and actually see a solution and say, well, that's not the solution. Well, what is? Well, that's not it. We're not going to allow these people to have a pathway to citizenship. We're just not going to do it. Oh, really? What's your plan? We're not going to allow these people to live illegally without paying some sort of fine. Okay, well, where's that plan? What they're doing is stalling. They're stalling. Democrats believe that these people are going to come in and be good socialist Democrats that'll continue voting for them forever. What they haven't realized is something the Republican Party has realized. Most of these people come to the United States and want to live in the United States. They left all this socialist garbage behind in the countries they left. But the Democrats haven't figured that out yet. They're the only ones spoiling for this open border idea. We have to figure this out. It's essential. Getting back to Mayorkas. He's talking about how the lawmakers need to fix this. Well, as long as the lawmakers are coming up with the Illegal Immigrant Voting Act, there won't be any immigration bill. But he goes on to say, quote, I have said to a number of legislators who expressed to me that we need to address the challenge at the border before they pass legislation, and I take issue with the math of holding the solution hostage until the problem is resolved. And there's another standoff. There's another standoff where all this hovers. The only people that are actually trying to do anything about it are the people running Texas. God bless them. There is work to be done, he said, before clarifying that a safe and secure are two different worlds. No, they're not. If you have a secure border, you have a safe border. Hello? There are smugglers that operate on the Mexican side of the border, and placing one's life in their hands is not safe. We'll do something about it. Stop inviting these people to the country and then have them put their lives in the hands of these unsafe people. This is circular logic. These guys can't be that stupid. His remarks come after Customs and Border Protection announced last week there were 207,000 migrant encounters at the border in June compared to just over 189,000 in June last year. I'm not sure that figure is correct. I saw 239,000 from the state of Texas. With June's numbers, there have now been 746,119 total encounters at the southern border in the 2022 fiscal year, outpacing the numbers set for fiscal year 2021. And there's still 3 months remaining in 2022. Republicans have zeroed in on the Biden administration's handling of the crisis, blaming its rolling back of the Trump-era border policy like the migrant protection protocols, which required migrants to be returned to Mexico for the duration of their immigration hearings. The administration also narrowed immigration and customs enforcement priorities, stopped border wall construction, and implemented an asylum rule to expedite the length of hearings. The administration pushed back on those claims by Republicans by blaming instead the closing off of legal asylum pathways by the Trump administration, and also pointing to root causes like poverty, violence, and corruption in Central America. That's none of our business. The poverty, violence, and corruption in Central America is Central America's problem. These people are exporting their working class. They're hollowing out their own countries. They will implode. But what they do is they make it more profitable for the people. You see, if you don't have to even rudimentarily take care of your people, well, that's more money for your bank account. That's what these despots down in Central America are banking on, and they're quite literally banking on it. It's also seeking to end Title 42 expulsions. This is the Biden administration seeking to end Title 42 expulsions, which have been used to expel a majority of migrants since March 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic, arguing that a shift to traditional expulsions will lower repeat encounters and dissuade migrants. These people come over once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. They're deported 3, 4 times. They keep coming back until they run somebody over because they're drunk. And then when somebody says, whoa, wait a minute. What are illegal immigrants doing in our country in the first place, let alone killing us? And then why is it that they're deported with a wrist slap and sent home? Don't do that again. Excuse me? Talk about this duopoly of law enforcement. If you're an illegal immigrant, in a lot of ways, you have more rights than American citizens. Seriously? I get a DUI, it ends my career. An illegal immigrant gets a DUI, he goes in one door of a jail and goes out another door of the jail. As soon as they find out that he's an illegal immigrant, by golly, ICE takes charge and then lets him go. Yeah, this is horrendous. This is horrendous. Mayorkas continues to repeatedly defend his handling of the border crisis. He said DHS inherited a broken and dismantled system that's already under strain. Only Congress can fix it. Yet we have effectively managed an unprecedented number of non-citizens seeking to enter the United States. You've done nothing of the kind. You facilitated that entry. You've enabled it. It is indeed a mess. It's unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. Coming up in just a couple of moments, what about the people actually doing the work down on the border? What can they expect from the government of the United States? Well, if all works out, a ruination of their career. More about that in just a moment. This is the Wells Report. You are listening to the Wells Report. I am John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. So we're talking a little bit about the border and the people down there that are trying to do the best they can under the circumstances that they've been handed. We're talking about the Texas National Guard, the Texas Military Department down there. We're also talking about the Border Patrol. September 19th, 2021. Photographers captured images of Border Patrol agents on horseback trying to prevent illegal aliens from Haiti from crossing the border near Del Rio, Texas. I was right up the road from this. To any reasonable person, the photos showed Border Patrol agents controlling their horses in rough terrain while trying to prevent the rush of Haitian migrants from getting past them. The only thing newsworthy about the photos at the time would have been a visual confirmation of the border crisis driven by 8 months of the new administration's refusal to enforce immigration law. This from Fox News. Instead, the Biden administration jumped to the politically convenient yet incorrect conclusion and began vilifying the Border Patrol agents for doing their jobs. In lockstep with the mainstream media, the Biden administration immediately amplified a lie that Border Patrol agents were whipping the illegal aliens. The president said this, quote, "It's horrible what you saw, to see people like they did with horses, running them over, people being strapped. It's outrageous," unquote. None of that happened. Vice President Kamala Harris said, quote, "As we all know, it evoked images of some of the worst moments in our history where that kind of behavior was used against indigenous people of our country, has been used against African Americans during times of slavery." Well, that's 147 years ago, if my math is right, which is not something that you should ever count on. It's a century and a half. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas said the images troubled me profoundly, and one cannot weaponize a horse against illegal aliens trying to cross the border. The rush to judgment and mischaracterization of the Border Patrol actions, according to this article, was disgraceful. The agents themselves and the photographer who snapped the now infamous picture immediately stated that no whipping occurred. The DHS Office of Inspector General immediately refused to take the case. U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Texas declined to take the case. The story doesn't end. The president went further, saying, "I promise you these people will pay. There's an investigation underway right now. There will be consequences." That was according to Vice President Harris. 10 months later, the U.S. Customs Border Protection Office of Professional Responsibility released their report, 511 pages worth. No evidence the Border Patrol agents involved in this incident struck, intentionally or otherwise, any migrant with their reins. Unfortunately, the salt is not the first or last time for this administration. For months, Border Patrol agents have been asking for effective policies to help end this historic border crisis, yet month after month, they receive little or no help from their political leadership. Morale is at an all-time low. The current political leadership delivers no solutions. What this means in practice, the administration has sidelined law enforcement career professionals from the decision-making process. Political leadership did not want to hear Border Patrol officials advocate for the policies that worked, such as an effective border wall, the Remain in Mexico program, implementation of asylum cooperative agreements with countries in Central America. Even the most highly trained law enforcement officers cannot perform at their best in an environment where they're understaffed, overworked, and unappreciated. And so the president of the United States still going after these guys. They've been exonerated. Why are they going after these guys? Because the president said they would, in a rush to judgment that does not, in any way, shape, or form, befit the office of the presidency of the United States. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. And they may be. But in this case, the 1,000 words being spoken had nothing to do with what the picture actually showed. Or didn't show, in this case. It's horrific. It's absolutely horrific. But it does have the proper effect. You know, horses have been running over this terrain in Texas, especially near the border, for centuries. They're really good at it. Horses are sure-footed critters. What are these guys doing right now? They're riding ATVs. ATVs, you know, if they flip over on top of the rider, I happen to know a guy that got killed that way. Well, that's the end of that. What they've also done is they've also created a scenario whereby these Border Patrol agents hesitate in the moment of law enforcement instead of enforcing the law. That level of political influence on straightforward law enforcement policy is insidious. Again, in my view, it absolutely is unfit, is is not something that the president of the United States or anyone in that office should be doing to their employees. It's awful. You were listening to the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Thanks very much for watching this. Tell your friends about us. Invite them to join us. We sure would appreciate it. It would be great. We'll be back tomorrow with another edition of this broadcast. Until then, as my wife Susan always says, be safe. Make good decisions. We can't afford to lose a single one of you. See you tomorrow for another edition of the Wells Report. Okay, friends, thanks very much for hanging with me again today. I sure do appreciate it. God bless you and all like you. And I will see you again tomorrow. How does that sound? All right? Good night